those guns in the shadows of the night.
Let's say that you have watched my Budget at Home Cerakote 101 video. You've got some practice under your belt. Maybe you've done some multicolor camouflage style finish work. You've gotten a little fancy and done a battle worn finish. But how do you go about getting better? How do you go about getting more efficient while still being budget, at home, and DIY? Well, if you're wondering that question, this video is for you. We're going to cover a bunch of little disparate topics, hints and little nuggets of information, if you will, that will help you do exactly that. And the first place we're going to start is using data to improve our finish quality in the form of a thickness gauge. A quick thank you to Passche Airbrushes and HVLP for supporting my Cerakote work. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. There's more Cerakote information coming in the pipeline. If you're wondering what all topics we're going to cover, go ahead and see the description. It'll give you the timestamps for all these disparate things. However, like I said, we're going to start with a thickness gauge. So first off, what is a thickness gauge? Well, it's something that allows you to measure how far the probe is from a piece of metal. So in the case of raw metal, it will read out all zeros because there is no distance between the two. However, if there is a coating on it, like say Cerakote, it will give you a readout, mine is set to mils, but it will give you a readout of how thick that coating is. So we can actually go in and test how good our Cerakoting has been. One of the interesting things about Cerakote is it gains its strength a decent amount from its thinness. So we actually don't want a thick coating. If you put too thick a coating on your Cerakote, which a lot of people when they're starting out are prone to want to do, you'll actually risk things like chipping. So you actually want a thin but full coat. So let's define what that means. You really want to be aiming for 1 to 2 mils, maximum 2 mils. When it comes to solid colors, you're going to have an easier time getting that 1 mil or below coat. When it comes to metallic colors, it's going to be a little harder to get that thin because of some of the stuff in them. And so those will look at more the 1 to 2 mil range again, but 2 is our max. When you start getting into multiple color layers, like in camouflage, or to a tiny extent battle worn, this becomes even more important because if your initial color layer is too thick, or if it's just your second coat that's too thick, not only, as we learned from some previous episodes, you might have actual like ridges in your finish that you can feel and see in the final product, but again, you might go over that that maximum thickness where you start to have issues like flaking and chipping. So it's really, really important to use data to better your skills at laying down an effective but thin coating. And really, the only way to do that is through data, because you can't look at a finish and go, oh, that's 1.5 mils thick. You can't get the feedback necessary to improve your processes just by looking at it. At the beginning of the video, you saw that big pile of Cerakoted goods. We're actually going to use that to test some past projects and see where we might be able to learn how we can improve. One of the first things you might want to do, though, is take a raw piece of metal, because this is only going to work with metal, and just check that you are zeroed and set to mils. So you're going to want to come as straight down and quickly as you can. Any tilt may alter your reading slightly. And we are zeroed out. So let's start with the first project we ever did, and that's going to be that Precision AR. And remember, this is the clear H series. So it has very little additive, except for the slight bit of mica powder, if you remember back to this project, that I put into this clear coat. So this is going to be a fairly easy finish to get thin. I will actually compare it to CMGs. You're also going to want to pick a nice flat spot because any curves or recesses will complicate your reading. So we are under a mil, but almost to 1. And like I said, this was a clear coat, so it's going to be an easier one to get thin. So we would expect, even back when I was using those old Harbor Freight spray guns, that I might get a good finish with that. It's always nice to take readings from a couple places too. See, I'm a little over a mil, right at a mil. So it will differ a bit, take a couple readings. But for my early work, this isn't bad. Let's also check CMMG, but let's remember this is a metallic. Oops. Yeah, so under 1.5 for a metallic, it's pretty good. Next up, let's switch over to project number 2 that we saw Cerakote work being done on. And that's going to be this 1911, where we had the series on how to do multicolor finishes. When testing a multicolor finish though, if we want to get accurate readings, we'll have to test, obviously the first color to know what our base thickness was. And then we'll come back and we'll actually test the total thickness, and that will tell us what our subsequent coat was. So yeah, I was spraying a little thick, but again, this is a metallic. So while I am within spec for that first coat, I have a feeling a second metallic coat, even a thin one, is going to put us over. Yep, and there we are. We are slightly over. So if we had a 1.7-ish for our first one, we're looking at a 0.7 thick secondary finish, which, again, while alone would be within spec, while we're doubling up, that's starting to get too thick. So I can definitely improve my work. So I went ahead and removed the slide so that we could take a look at what the solid color on the frame was. I couldn't really get this in there with the slide on. And as you can see, I was spraying the tungsten in this case at about 1.4. So that's a pretty decent spray. But again, I'm using this data, which I used at the time, and you'll see how I can improve. I'm using this data to understand that even what I thought was a nice thin secondary coat for subsequent colors was still probably going on a little thick, and I could probably cut things back a little bit with my primary colors as well if I know that I'm doing a secondary color. Next up, let's look at some solid color work that I've done. And again, we're going in order of time here so we can see the evolution of my skill set with Cerakote. And you should use a similar data-driven methodology in order to improve yourself as well. So this is a solid color, so obviously it's going to be a little easier for us to get a nice thin finish. This is a leftover from a batch of handguards I did for a buddy. So we are below 1 on solid color. Around the same time was when I was doing those Geisler magwells. And this is, again, a solid color. It's black, so I should have pretty good results. Yep, even thinner, so 0.9. It's also worth noting that by this point in time, I have dropped my use of the cheaper Harbor Freight stuff, and I have switched over to my Paasche airbrushes. So not only understanding my spraying technique, but also upgrading to a higher quality gun, I'm starting to see some improved skill as well. Remember this project? We went back to metallics. Again, this is with my nicer gun. This is after getting this tool so I can start seeing patterns in my process versus the outcomes. So I should expect a slightly thinner coat. About 1.5. While 1.5 mils is not a bad number like we just saw, that's still not as good as I could be getting. And so I took information from that build with the charcoal green and applied it to my next metallics project, because metallics seem to be where I'm still struggling a little bit. And this is midnight bronze on an octagonal barrel nut idea that I'm playing with to fit those carbon fiber handguards I like. Let's see how I'm doing with the feedback from those. That's a really good reading. Are we good everywhere? Yeah. So what I changed here is the speed at which I'm moving the gun. I'm now understanding, especially with the metallics, that I was moving a little too slow while spraying, And speeding that up a bit is really helping me out. I also went and applied that knowledge to the most recent thing I have sprayed. This came out of the oven yesterday. It's a solid color, so we should be seeing sub 1 mil thicknesses. But this is where my skills currently sit. P.S. This came out of the oven yesterday too, so this is a current evaluation of my skills. So this should be probably the best painting I've done so far. Let's take a look. Sub 1, sub 1. Still room for improvement, but not bad. I did want to show off a little bit. These are some of the last magwells I had to coat, and they came out of the oven and were sprayed at the same time as this lower. They're a less complex shape to spray than this here, so we should get great results. Yeah, 0.87. That's how you can use data to improve your skills. One of the biggest critiques a buddy of mine gave me about my Cerakote 101 video is I didn't go into the details of gun setup. It didn't matter much back then because the guns I was using were trash. But now that I've got this nice Paasche gun, it matters. So here we're going to set up for the spot pattern. We're going to do no fan. We're going to do a half turn on this particular gun with almost no air. And we are slowly going to move around while increasing the air until we get to a point where we have almost no splatter marks left, but they're still there a tiny bit. That is going to be the sign that we have enough pressure, but we're still high volume. You can see that here as I increased that air volume. We went from a lot of splatter to almost none. And this is what we're going to be using, obviously, if you've watched my other Cerakote content, to be getting into tight spaces or to be doing subsequent colors when we're doing multicolor work. In a similar vein, you can do a very similar setup but with some actual fan to it. I generally like on this particular gun to do equal parts fan and volume, but again, completely close off my air, turn it on a tiny bit, and then just walk it up slowly while testing. Again, we're looking for that little bit of fan, as you can see, and getting almost rid of splatter. While I don't generally use something like this for like the spot pattern inside tight spaces, this is good for subsequent colors where you're trying to be light on your second application over a previous color. And last but not least, we'll get into the traditional method. Air wide open, and then on these Paasche guns, I like to match, again, the ratio of volume to fan is 1-to-1 for these. This is not the same as the Iwatas. So if I'm doing a 1.5 fan, I'm doing a 1.5 volume, full air. And you can see it flashing off there when I spray. You get that nice volume and it flashes off. And you can obviously tweak and adjust it to meet your needs. And that is obviously the pattern that you would use for full-on spraying of a base coat. This is our standard pattern. Not knowing how to properly clean a gun can actually ruin it over time, but not knowing how to do it efficiently can ruin your time. So I'm going to walk you through how I clean a gun quickly and efficiently. First things first, pour out any leftover Cerakote and throw some acetone into your cup. And then we're going to take half of a paper towel, ball it up, and just put it at the top. We're not trying to get it to touch that acetone we just poured down in there. We want it to be kind of free and open. From here, you're going to, well, preferably with a clean hand, I'll take this glove off to make sure so I'm not getting gunk on my needle and nozzle, but take a clean finger and place it over the air nozzle and the needle. If you do just air, it'll sound like that. But when you go past air a little, you hear that bubbling noise? When you go past the wall of air to fluid, just the tiniest amount, it'll cycle the air back up into the cup, and that's going to really help clean things out. And I'm going to pour this acetone into a dirty acetone container. I keep this dirty acetone because if you let it settle, the Cerakote particles will go to the bottom, and you can actually skim off relatively clean acetone from the top to reuse for non-critical tasks in the future. So it does save you some acetone dollars. I'm going to do this process twice with the bubbling. It takes some getting used to, but again, finger over everything up at the front, pull air back into the wall, and then just a tiny bit past. And you'll hear that bubbling. This is enough to clean the gun in between colors. It is also the first step I take before doing a full clean like you see here. What I'll do is I will soak most of the parts in a container filled with acetone. I will not put the whole gun in there, but I will put the head of the gun in there just for a little while to loosen things up, and then go at it with some Q-tips. These do have the risk of leaving some fibers in there, the cotton fibers, so I do blow out anything that I've hit with a Q-tip with compressed air after I've finished up that work. But again, I'm not soaking the whole gun, just the top area where you've got those two openings after taking all the parts out. And this kind of just loosens things up again for the Q-tip application. I'm doing that until there's no more paint left on the Q-tip, and then I'll do it to some other areas. Basically anywhere that I've got some screw threads, this is a good time to get these Q-tips out and really clean things up. And you can see how dirty that one was, so I'm going to still go back again with another Q-tip. Those outer threads are usually better handled with just a wet rag of acetone. There we go, just like that. So grip it between and just kind of move it around. Some of these threads are hard to get everything out of though, but do your best. The cup is probably not the worst place if a little gets left. Other components, not so much. And really what I'm doing here is I'm just going through all of the various components and making sure I get off as much of the Cerakote as possible. Again, soaking these elements in the acetone does make that easier and faster, as the Cerakote residue will be soft and easier to get out. When it comes to the needle, I like to try and get off as much as I possibly can with a soaked rag. It's got a little abrasion to it, and so you usually can get off most of the coloration on the needle this way. The nozzle part here that you just saw me cleaning is a great representative of a part that I blow out as well with compressed air after I've done my cleaning, just to make sure that everything is out of those little tiny holes, both where the needle comes through as well as air on the sides. Oh, and I forgot to mention, you can see that there's a little brush down in the acetone at the top there. I use that brush to loosen up everything in various holes prior to going the Q-tip route. It just didn't get shown here. I mentioned that I'm getting better results partially from my learning, but also partially from upping my equipment. If you remember back from the first video, I was using these Harbor Freight Central Pneumatic HVLP guns. I was getting inconsistent results with them. You'll remember that I even said each gun I bought would have different settings, so even that wasn't consistent. My results weren't nearly as consistent as I would like them to be, and they died pretty quickly. I was never really sure why, but that would also lead to a need to adjust these knobs over the life of the gun. So I have fully switched over to these Paasche HVLP guns. As you saw at the beginning, I am sponsored by them. They did send these out to me, but I reached out to them because I wanted to level up. And these are definitely allowing me to level up. I'm getting a much more consistent spray, and that is both in terms of settings as well as my results when I'm using my reader. So I can trust that I'm going to get an output that I like more with this setup. I'm not going to go too deep into talking about these guns simply because I'm going to do a full review on them once I've been using them for a year. And I'm going to go into big detail on what I think of them, settings, all that sort of stuff. But I wanted to show them here just to say that, yes, you can, to a certain extent, buy skill. I'm better with a better gun. I can even see the Cerakote atomizing better and hitting the surface and flowing better. Like, you can watch yourself be better with better equipment. Is it going to fix everything and make you an amazing Cerakoter? No, practice and learning does. But getting better equipment doesn't hurt. And these still are way within what I would call budget DIY at home price level. Fantastic bang for buck. The last little tip that I wanted to talk about is, as you go forward in your Cerakote journey, you may want to start Cerakoting barrels or just anything that might have holes that you don't want material to get in, but barrels is probably where you'll encounter this most. So I wanted to introduce silicone plugs. They are dime a dozen. Go on Amazon, just pick a random. But what it allows you to do is you can take your hanging wire and drill a hole through the silicone. It'll close up basically immediately, but it'll be there. That's going to allow you to then push the wire through, and that will hold that little tiny hole open. But you can then push this down the barrel, and it's going to plug, we'll see, from both sides, and not allow Cerakote in there. You also use these during your blasting stage to make sure that you're not blasting your nice rifling inside and the chamber and all of that. So they are high temperature. They will withstand your off-gassing. It lists out the temperature when you buy them up to 600 Fahrenheit. So we are really safe here. One thing I will note is I do use steel wire. And so when I shove this down the barrel, I do use a pair of pliers to turn that tip so that I don't have a sharp end. That's going to allow me to feed it down the barrel without worry. I can then plug this side, unbend that tip, string this one down in there and plug both sides. And these plugs, they have some give to them, some spring. So when you actually have it installed correctly, like I'm talking about, you can actually hang the barrel, and especially when you've got the one on the bottom holding it as well, it allows you to nicely put this in your oven, etc.